Okay. Everybody, please sit. Please take your seats. There are empty seats in the second row here, in the second row there. There are some seats scattered about. If you'll be kind enough to sit, we can begin. But I am not going to begin until everybody is seated, because I'm a tyrant, as everybody knows. A couple of stragglers in the back. But we're just about ready. We're just about ready. Can everybody hear me? Anybody who can hear me? Okay, you have no excuses for not sitting down. As soon as I get the word, I will gavel the meeting to order. I await orders from above. I now call to order the lecture portion of the Society's 2,528th meeting in what is now the 154th year since PSW was founded on March 13th, 1871. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Welcome to our first meeting of the new year, 2026. My name is Larry Milstein. I am the president of PSW, one of the oldest scientific societies of Washington, D.C., committed to providing a forum to further scientific understanding and inquiry to as broad an audience as is interested. Welcome to our members, guests, and friends to the lecture part of today's PSW meeting and to the lecture by Bernard Carlson on Tesla, Marconi, and the invention of radio dueling wireless giants, 1890 to 1920. Let's begin by thanking our sponsors, without whom we would not be here, PSW member Mike Helton and Helton Associates. I want to thank Mike especially. It was his generosity that got PSW through COVID in the black, and for that we are very grateful. Let's also thank PSW member Joe Schulman and the Schulman Foundation for their recent very generous support. Thank you. And the sponsor of tonight's lecture, PSW member A.C. Charania, who's in the audience and who has brought an entourage with him of people that we are really enjoying meeting. I think you'll hear later that A.C. suggested I invite Bernard to talk about Tesla, and we worked for quite some time to bring this about. And we are very grateful to our sponsors, and particularly to AC tonight, so thank you. The Society needs support to meet expenses for the year. These rooms are not free, and neither is all the back office work that gets done to keep the Society going. So if you have not given, please do. If you have given, and you feel you can give some more, please do that. Now is an auspicious time to make a donation because PSW is the beneficiary of a generous matching grant. Every dollar you give will be matched 2 to 1 up to the first $5,000 of donations. And the match runs through the end of this month. So please do give this year. That, I am pleased to announce the following new members. Anand Desai, researcher and professor emeritus, Claravet and Ohio State University interested in science, the science of science, evaluation of investments in research and in technology and innovation, who learned a PSW by attending a PSW talk by a colleague. Chris Cahill, professor of chemistry at GWU, interested in nuclear science, the history of science, and the intersection of science and public policies, who learned a PSW from his membership in the Cosmos Club. Patrick Sherrill, head of product at Amazon, generally interested in science. Tessa Howe, cyber risk and transformation analyst with Deloitte, interested in cryptography and DNA digital storage, among other things, who learned a PSW from researching organizations of science in the D.C. area. Christopher Eddie Calton, a geoengineering consultant with Anduin Strategies, interested in marine protection and biodiversity, land use and preservation, and large-scale conservation projects, who learned a PSW from searching the web. He doesn't specify how. So I'm very interested to see how many people are finding out about us using an LLM. And Raju Ravindranath, a biotechnologist and science educator, broadly interested in science, particularly the histories of scientific discoveries, who learned a PSW from me. She was a student in my IP class in the biotechnology program at Georgetown. And tonight's speaker, Bernard Carlson, whose interests will be clear to you in some small part from tonight's lecture. All members are entitled to a signed copy of Compendium Volume 17 of the Bulletin of the PSW. If you haven't received yours, please come see me after the meeting. All members also are invited to pre-lecture receptions and dinners with the speakers for camaraderie and interesting discussion. If you're interested in membership, you can access a membership application on the PSW website by clicking the blue Join button on the home page at the upper right-hand corner, or you can pick up one of the cards on the cocktail tables at the back of the room, where you'll find a QR code that will take you right to the membership application. Membership is open to everyone with a genuine interest in science, pursuant to the payment of the $75 annual dues. If you have financial need, however, please do get in touch with us. With that, recording secretary Scott Matthews will now present the minutes of the 2,527th meeting and the lecture by Davy Smith of UCSD on As If the Way One Died Mattered, The Last Gift, Finding a Cure for HIV. Scott, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Larry. Good evening. On December 19th, 2025, members of the Society and guests joined the speaker for a reception and dinner at 5:45 p.m. in the members' dining room at the Cosmos Club. Thereafter, they joined other attendees in the Powell Auditorium for the lecture proceedings. In the Powell Auditorium of the Cosmos Club in Washington, D.C., President Larry Milstein called the lecture portion of the 2,527th meeting of the Society to order at 8:06 p.m. Eastern Time. He began by welcoming attendees, thanking sponsors for their support, announcing new members, and inviting guests to join the Society. Scott Matthews then read the minutes of the previous meeting, which included the lecture by Rosalie Lopez titled Volcanism and Cryovolcanism Throughout the Solar System. The minutes were approved as read. President Milstein then introduced the speaker for the evening, Davy Smith, of the University of California, San Diego. His lecture was titled, As If the Way One Died Mattered. The speaker began by asking the audience if they would be willing to participate in a research study if they had less than 6 months to live. He indicated that between 80 and 90% of people, both with and without HIV, would agree to participate. He said that participation rates dropped to about 50%, if participation would shorten their life by approximately 4 weeks. He discussed some of the issues associated with HIV research, saying that it is difficult to reach important anatomic sites in living patients, and autopsy studies are rarely performed quickly enough for accurate post-mortem characterization. He then described the Last Gift study, a program in which altruistic persons with HIV and a terminal illness agree to rapid autopsy performed within 6 hours of death. Smith discussed the attitudes and opinions of study participants and their next of kin, saying that the vast majority reported higher quality of life scores after enrolling in the study. He said that many participants used the phrase, quote, "my death will not be in vain," end quote. He said that this sentiment was reflected in participants' Beck depression scores, which indicated that patients in the study were less depressed as they approached death. In that sense, Smith said, the last gift program was not completely altruistic, in that the participants received measurable benefits. The speaker discussed the ante-mortem data acquired before a patient dies, including viral load, medications, alcohol consumption, drug use, narcotic painkillers, etc. He indicated that this data was crucial to the post-mortem analysis, mapping out which tissues absorb which compounds. Smith then described the rapid autopsy process. A team of about a dozen clinicians, made up of doctors, pathologists, and deaners, remove organs from the body, dissect small pieces of tissue from each organ, seal them in labeled vials, and rapidly freeze the samples. Once frozen, these tissue samples are shipped to a variety of laboratories, each having expertise in a particular type of analysis. The speaker then gave details about some of the data acquired from the post-mortem tissue. He said that opioids appeared in higher concentrations in the spleen and liver and lower concentrations in muscle tissue. He said that antiretroviral compounds were found in high levels in the stomach, vascular system, and several other tissues, but the concentrations found in the central nervous system were extremely low. Smith indicated that HIV has two types, HIV DNA and HIV RNA. He said that antiretroviral therapies were effective at stopping the RNA component, but not the DNA. He said that HIV evolves so rapidly that every infected person has a different genetic variant. He discussed how these variations informed the mapping of HIV viral reservoirs across different tissues, leading to the conclusion that the blood was the, quote, highway spreading the virus throughout the body. He discussed how certain tissues in the central nervous system, like the basal ganglia and the hippocampus, have very high transcriptional activity, meaning that the HIV DNA produces more HIV RNA. Smith said that researchers were somewhat surprised to learn that the spinal cord was, quote, a sanctuary for HIV persistence, and that HIV DNA appears to be evolving to its environment, specifically in the spinal cord. He said that the spinal cord was the highway moving HIV around the central nervous system. Smith said that researchers had long suspected that microglia in the brain acted as a persistent reservoir, but that only with the advent of rapid autopsy were researchers at the University of North Carolina able to extract microglia from the brain cells to confirm this hypothesis. The speaker discussed the relationship between HIV and cancer, saying that researchers hypothesize that HIV is causing, quote, T cells to become lazy, end quote. T cells with HIV appear to be less effective at destroying cancer cells, resulting in the comorbidity between HIV and cancer. The speaker ended his talk by discussing people's willingness to participate in research involving a variety of interventions or exposure to specific pathogens at the end of life. He said that over half of the people surveyed would be willing to participate. Smith said, quote, "No matter how you are feeling about the human race these days, this should give you hope," end quote. The lecture was followed by a question and answer session. A member asked if the last gift program and rapid autopsy could be used to study diseases other than HIV. Smith responded that they have submitted proposals for cancer grants, diabetes grants, heart failure grants, and rheumatology grants. A member asked why the process of performing a rapid autopsy and then freezing tissue was better than freezing the body and performing the autopsy later. Smith responded that after rapid autopsy, tissues are frozen with liquid nitrogen, whereas the conventional freezing of a body is done at about 4 degrees C. He said that they use a controlled rate freezing process with specific chemical additives that are appropriate for small pieces of tissue and could not be implemented on an entire body. A member on the live stream asked if the last gift program was listed on the NIH Clinical Studies website and asked where people could learn more about participating in such research studies. Smith responded that they are listed on the NIH website and that the study has its own website at lastgift.ucsd.edu. After the question and answer period, President Milstein thanked the speaker and presented him with a PSW rosette, a signed copy of the announcement of his talk, and a signed copy of Volume 17 of the PSW Bulletin. He then announced speakers of upcoming lectures and made a number of housekeeping announcements. He adjourned the 2,527th meeting of the Society at 9:52 p.m. Eastern Time. Temperature in Washington, D.C., 3.3 degrees Celsius. Weather, partly cloudy. Audience in the Powell Auditorium, 54. Viewers on the live stream, 20, for a total of 74 viewers. Views of the video in the first 2 weeks, 161. Respectfully submitted, Scott Matthews, Recording Secretary.
Thank you, Scott. Are there any comments or corrections to the minutes? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to accept the minutes as read. Second. All members in favor? All members opposed? Minutes are unanimously accepted and will be posted to the website in due course. And we now turn to tonight's lecture by Bernard Carlson. Bernie is the Vaughn Professor Emeritus of Humanities at the University of Virginia and recently retired as Program Manager for the Ag Innovation Program at the University of Galway in Ireland. Previously, he chaired the Department of Engineering and Society and held joint appointments in the History Department and the Joring Center for Nursing Historical Inquiry at the University of Virginia. At UVA, he played a central role in launching formal programs that integrate engineering with entrepreneurship to help students bring new technologies to market. And at the Ag Innovation Program, he helped over 200 students create new businesses. He's been particularly interested in understanding the creative processes behind invention and the ways technology reshapes business and society. He's written widely on innovation and entrepreneurship, and on the role of technology in the rise and fall of civilizations, including the books Innovation as a Social Process, Elihu Thomson and the Rise of General Electric, the 7-volume compendium, Technology in World History, Electrical Conquest, New Approaches to the History of Electrification, and Tesla, the inventor of the electrical age, which has now been translated into 11 languages, including Serbian. He's also filmed a series of 36 lectures on understanding the inventions that changed the world for the Teaching Company, and he just finished a recording of 6 audio lectures for the Teaching Company to celebrate the 150th anniversary of the invention of the telephone by Alexander Graham Bell. And I would be remiss if I did not mention that Bell demonstrated his telephone early on at a meeting of the PSW, rather immediately after he filed his patent application. Hopefully, Bernie will come back and talk about the invention of the telephone and some of its many controversies. It's fascinating. Among other honors and awards, Bernie won the Sally Hacker Prize from the Society for the History of Technology and the William Middleton Prize from the IEEE for his biography of Tesla. He earned an undergraduate degree in history and physics at Holy Cross College and a PhD in history and sociology of science at the University of Pennsylvania. All questions will be fielded after the lecture during our Q&A session, which often goes on for quite some time. Bernie, the stage is yours.
He's gotten down safely. All right. Yeah, no disasters tonight. Nobody's going to fall down. You know, we're all going to have a fine time, and I am going to enlighten you about Nikola Tesla. You have to understand, I grew up in New Jersey, but I spent 36 years, half of my life at the University of Virginia, and I had to learn how to blend in with the locals. And so every so often I do slip into an occasional bad Southern accent. But I will endeavor, I promise, not to do it too much. So it's a great pleasure to be here and a great honor to be speaking before the PSW, and thanks to Larry and to AC for organizing this session. AC had the vision. He said to Larry, I said, Larry, we need to have a Tesla lecture. And so Larry reached out to me and thought I was only down the road at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. Sadly, to find out that I now live in Ireland, in Galway, just outside the University of Galway, and so we had to wait till an opportunity came that I was back to the States to do this excellent opportunity. So, I write biographies of inventors. Okay, and this has been the story of my life. I started at the University of Pennsylvania. My advisor there, a wonderful man named Tom Hughes, looked around and he said, "You're going to do inventors." And I said, "I guess I'm going to do inventors." And it was just as well because he had another student who basically was assigned to write the electrification of the Ruhr in Germany. And I was like, thank God I don't have to write the electrification of the Ruhr in Germany. And you might sort of say, so why do we need biographies of inventors? Why, why worry about this? Isn't technology, particularly the technologies that we're debating today, such as artificial intelligence, aren't they largely shaped basically by, what science lets us do, or by, the forces of the marketplace, where investors, and capitalists want to put their money? And one of the things I want to get you to think about tonight is the role of individuals. You might agree with what I say about individuals, and you might not. But nonetheless, individuals make choices that shape the evolution of technology and business. And this is especially true if we want to talk about a particular class of technologies, disruptive technologies. AI being the immediate example that we're thinking about these days. But we could be talking about any number of disruptive technologies. And what do I mean by that? I mean major new technologies that alter the status quo of the economy, okay, change the way businesses do business. But they also begin to dramatically change our daily lives. Think cell phones as one example. Okay, and these technologies submitted for your consideration often start with ideas from the minds of creative individuals. Okay, they're not out there in some other way, but they are a passion of a particular individual who wants to change the world, make something new and interesting. And Tesla is a great example of that. Now, I found that, in teaching engineering students for, for over 30 years, that, they needed a big picture and they need a visual image of what's going on with technology across time. And I discovered, much to my delight, that an economist in the Soviet era in the 1920s came up with this handy-dandy image called Kondriev cycles. And as you can see there, there's, we got the right, nope, I don't have the right thing. Push the right button. Thank God. Okay. You have the Industrial Revolution there, and you have the, basically steam engines and railroads and steel. You have a second Industrial Revolution that's really built around electrification and chemicals. Another one in the 1920s, in the first part of the 20th century around, largely automobiles, and there's the computer revolution. And when you're talking to engineering students, or you're trying to get them to think about being innovators and entrepreneurs, you want to say, girls, boys, what's this going to look like? What's the next wave? Because that's what you're going to be shaping. And much of the reason why I study inventors and entrepreneurs is to identify the patterns by which they bring new ideas to life, and can those patterns be used to guide that next generation that is going to produce what's going to be coming there, okay? Now, an important thing is tonight, we're going to be talking about, got to make sure I'm in the right place. We're going to be talking about what, is listed as the third Kondratiev cycle there. Okay, electrification. And indeed, my book was titled, and this wasn't the title I wanted, but when the publisher says, son, this is going to be your title, and you say, well, I guess it's going to be my title. So the title of the book is Tesla, Inventor of the Electrical Age. But I was happy with that title because it makes the point that that wave, that third set of developments, in the late 19th century, were shaped by people like Tesla. Maybe he didn't entirely create the electrical age, but he was a major participant in it. Now, what were his most important inventions? For years, we celebrated that Nikola Tesla invented the first practical AC motor. Okay? Before Tesla, if you were going to talk about electrification, you're going to talk about the electrical revolution, you would have been talking about electric lighting. Thomas Edison, incandescent lighting, direct current. After Tesla, you begin to be able to talk about electric light and power. Power is only possible because you, for the first time, have a practical motor that can be used in all sorts of different applications. You have dozens, if you don't even realize it, in your home right now, running your refrigerator, running the hard drive on your computer. The list goes on and on. But he had not just a big success in the first part of his career, the AC motor, but he had an equally interesting adventure in the second part of his career, where he worked on wireless power. And he was the visionary who first really proposed what to do with wireless power, which is a disruptive technology that's taking shape right even as we speak right now. Okay, so let's look. I'll tell you a little bit about Tesla's early life, but let's look at what he thought he was going to do with wireless power. And the time period that we're dealing with is from about 1890 to 1905. Now, you could tell it as a story about a heroic inventor single-handedly changing the course of human history. Or you could think about it, which is what I want to do, a little something different, as a race between rivals. Now, most of you probably know, and I'm just looking to make sure I hit the right button, that, Tesla had a major rivalry with Thomas Edison. He worked for Thomas Edison briefly in his career, early on in his career. And Edison was all about direct current and the incandescent light. And Tesla wanted to develop alternating current AC. Okay? And we assume because this became a big battle between Edison's companies and Westinghouse, and with Tesla working for Westinghouse, that this must have been the major rivalry in Tesla's life, okay? And it's a rivalry that keeps coming back and turns up in pop songs and any number of places because it reflects a number of tensions that we have about ourselves and about technology. Selfishness, which is often now the way Edison is presented, versus altruism. I'm doing it for the good of society, Tesla. It's about profits. Edison is now seen as a greedy bastard, okay? Whereas when I first went into the invention business 35 years ago, Edison was seen as this paragon of business practicality. He wasn't seen as a greedy, mean guy, okay? And by the way, Edison did not electrocute the elephant, okay? And you can ask me about that later, but he did not electrocute the elephant. And an elephant got electrocuted, but this was not Edison's doing, all right? But that's a whole other story, and I'm supposed to tell you about Tesla, okay? And there's this thing about, Edison is really about rationality. Tesla is kind of this sort of etheric, intuition, magic guy, okay? Now, if you ask Tesla, who was his great nemesis? Who was his great rival? It was not Thomas Edison. Okay, and I can tell you stories about, other stories about Edison and Tesla and their interaction, okay? For Tesla, the number one guy that made him crazy was Guiglielmo, I'll never say it quite right, Guiglielmo Marconi. Okay. Say it for me in a loud voice. Thank you. All right. Okay. And Tesla would have been livid if you go over to Alexandria and you go to the main USPTO search room, and there, overlooking everything. Thank God that didn't go. I didn't push the button hard enough. There is Tesla's signature up there, up over in the atrium, and right next to him is Marconi's. That would have made him crazy. Okay. All right. So the trouble with the history of radio is we tend to think about it as a heroic as a heroic invention, okay, and that there can only be one true father of radio, okay. But what's the story look like if it's a true race between two guys, each watching the other, sort of saying, "He's moving too fast. I better jump. I better do something," or that other things are happening. And so, thinking about Tesla and telling a story about Tesla, if I throw in a little bit about Marconi, does it give you a different way of thinking about where those disruptive technologies come from? Okay, so first part, we're going to talk a little bit about Tesla, and I'll bring Marconi in a little while here. But Tesla was born in 1856 in southeastern Europe, what is today Croatia. All right, and the Croatians are very proud of him, and have preserved his birthplace and so on and so forth. His family, however, was Serbian, and the time period that he grew up in was in the age of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy or empire. Okay, and so the Austrians mixed up the people in that region. So you had Serbs living next door to Croats. The Serbs were Serbian Orthodox, or much like the Russian Orthodox. Croats were generally Catholic. So it was a very complicated world. All right. His father and his uncles were all priests in the Serbian Orthodox Church. And they initially thought that Nikola would follow his father into the priesthood. But as he finished high school, Nikola basically was told by his father, "Don't come home," because there was a cholera epidemic going through their town. Nikola, being 16 or 17 years old, sort of said, yeah, right, Dad. So he comes home and he gets cholera. He's on his deathbed. Oh, and his father is just like beside himself because they've already lost son number one. Okay, so Nikola's son number two. And his father says, son, if you survive, you get better. You can have anything you want. Oh, I'm dying. But I might get better if instead of going to the seminary, I could go to science school. Son, it's done. And so he went and enrolled in the Johann Polytechnic Institute in Graz, Austria. And as a student there, Tesla fell in with the physics professor. And the physics professor one day demonstrated an electric motor. And this is the late 1870s, so this is pretty exciting. This is cutting-edge stuff. But the motor sparked badly. And Tesla shot up his hand and he said, "Professor, I can make this motor stop sparking." And his professor said, "Right, and we can have a perpetual motion machine." So, and most of us, if we got put down by the professor like that, we'd pull our tail between our legs and like say, "I'm never going to say anything ever again in class." Okay, Tesla goes home, thinks about it, and he says, "I'm going to prove that guy wrong." And indeed, it took him a number of years, but in 1881, he was walking in the park in Budapest, and there, sun's going down. He's reciting poetry from Goethe. He's with his best good friend, and he has the vision. And the vision that he has is to think about electric motors like a maverick. Keep that in mind. Tesla is a maverick. Everybody goes this way. Tesla goes that way. Right? That's how he is. Now, in electric motors. This is for the young people in the room, which most of you are. Okay, this is physics lesson 1 in the lecture. Okay, electric motors have two sets of magnets, and then basically the motor turns. The shaft rotates because at any given moment, those magnets are pushing away from each other. So the trick is to always make sure, and they're electromagnets, that they are always pushing away from each other. So you have to change the direction of the current in one set of electromagnets or the other. So one set is on the shaft, the rotor. The other set is in the fixed part or the stator, rotor and stator. Okay. Everybody before this, whether they're making an alternating current motor or they're making a DC motor, said we'll change the direction of the current and hence the direction of the magnetic fields in the rotor, which means you have to have this messy sparking rotary switch, also known as a commutator. Okay, Tesla's big insight, sun's going down, he's reciting poetry, he's thrilled, he's a happy guy, as he says, don't change the direction of the current and the magnets in the rotating part of the motor. Change it in the stationary part. And to change it in the stationary part, we've got to use alternating current. Okay? And that's all there is to it. Brilliant idea is just flip it around. And you'll see that this turns up again when we talk about what he wanted to do with electromagnetic waves. Okay, so he has this great idea, but he has no idea how to actually build this motor, nor is there any place where he can actually go and sign up for 10 easy lessons in electrical engineering. There's no electrical engineering programs. So what's the next best thing? You go to work for the Edison companies. And he does in a number of cities, and he works his way up as a field engineer, basically figuring out how to make Edison electric lighting plants work. Okay, they get built, and then and then things go wrong, and tons of glitches. And he would go in, and he'd basically sort things out. Okay, and he gets the attention of Edison's right-hand man, a guy named Charles Batchelor. Charles Batchelor writes, and again, one of the great stories about letters of recommendation. So Batchelor basically says to Tesla, "I'm sending it to you to New York, and here's your letter of recommendation. When you get to see Edison, hand it over." And the letter basically says, I know two great men dear Mr. Edison, I know two great electricians in the world, you and the guy standing in front of you. Okay, so you ever go in and talk to your, later on, you go talk to your professors and you say, "Please, sir, can I have a letter of recommendation?" You want a letter of recommendation like that. Okay. So, goes to work for Edison. He's there for about 8-10 months. And he basically, says, this isn't working for me. He feels that he's basically been taken advantage of by Edison. So he basically quits Edison, winds up digging ditches in New York, where they're laying electric conduit lines. There he meets these two gentlemen, Charles Peck and Alfred Brown. And they basically say, "We'll set you up. We'll bankroll you. We'll build you a laboratory about where the World Trade Center was in New York City, in downtown Manhattan." Charles Peck was a very successful speculator in the telegraph industry. So they build him a laboratory, and they basically say, develop an alternating current motor for us, which he delivers on. Peck then turns around and successfully sells the patents to Westinghouse. And off Tesla goes for, again, Tesla has more great jobs, in his life and quits than almost anybody I ever met. Okay, works for Edison, works for Westinghouse. So he's at Westinghouse for about a year, does a lot of good work, but he gets pretty quickly into routine engineering. So Tesla quits, and he goes off, not to Disneyland like in the old commercials, but he goes off to the Paris World's Fair of 1889. Which is the fair where they actually built the Eiffel Tower. That's why I picked this particular postcard. So so I hope you appreciate my efforts in picking good illustrations. And there he basically sits in cafes and he starts talking to graduate students that are studying cutting edge physics and electrical physics all across Europe. And one of the people he meets is a graduate student that's working for Heinrich Hertz. And about this time, Hertz has successfully figured out how to detect radio waves or electromagnetic waves. Some of you in the audience know that this was predicted by James Clerk Maxwell, a British physicist, in the late 1860s, but nobody had actually been able to verify that such waves existed. Hertz came up with some really interesting, simple experiments where he figured out how to detect radio waves, electromagnetic radiation. Tesla basically reads up on this, studies Hertz's circuits, and says, which is classic what an inventor does, "I'm going to soup up the Hertz apparatus." And he soups up the Hertz apparatus. And if you want to ask me questions, I'll explain to you what I mean by souping it up. But that allows him to create what today we call a Tesla coil. Okay? Now, an interesting little side story is Tesla's experimenting away in the early 1890s. We're now in about 1891, 1892, with his Tesla coil, and he's having a great time, and he's generating electromagnetic waves, and he decides that Hertz is, by the way, wrong. The waves are not transverse. In other words, they're not going like this. Tesla thinks that they're like sound waves in a slinky, so they're longitudinal. And Tesla has the nerve to show up in Hertz's laboratory in 1893 and say, well, by the way, Heinrich, you're wrong. Okay? Not everybody can quite do that. There's a lot of things that Tesla does that I'd recommend that you take to heart and think about doing that. I wouldn't walk in and tell Heinrich Hertz that he was wrong. Okay? So, but that's Tesla for you. Okay. He also discovers that if you take a Geissler tube, which has a small amount of a gas in it, like neon, and I had a Geissler tube, and sadly I dropped it and broke it on my way to doing a demonstration from engineering students, and it's really sad when you see a 68-year-old man crying in the stairwell of the engineering school. But it just shot out of my hand, and there it went. But anyhow, if you were to take that tube with a small amount of neon gas in it, or other gases, but I had one with neon gas, and you got your Tesla coil going, and it's humming away there, and you basically can hold the Geissler tube, and it lights up wirelessly right there before your very eyes. Okay. Everybody was just amazed by this idea because this was action at a distance, and physicists and scientists were really amazed at this. And so what Tesla did is he did a series of lectures and demonstrations to a nice audience like you. And what he did is as you can see in the left-hand picture, there's Tesla, and he's holding a great big, would have looked like fluorescent tube. Okay, and what's going to happen is in a moment, just be after this picture, this woodcut is created, is the lights are going to go out, and he's going to step between these two zinc plates, which are connected to his Tesla coil, and that big tube is going to light up magically, as if he's holding, a Star Wars lightsaber. Okay, this is 1891. Now, so Tesla envisions that you're going to create a system of electric lighting, wireless electric lighting, by having basically metallic wallpaper, and you would get rid of all these annoying wires, and what you would do is you'd basically have a light on a stand and the tube, and you'd rotate the tube so it was aligned with the electromagnetic field in the room, and it would light up. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. Okay, anybody want that? I'm going to sign up for it. I'm tired of having all these wires and trying to figure out how to plug things in and so on and so forth. Okay, so Tesla patents this system, does lots of demonstrations for it, tells the people that we're going to get rid of all these annoying wires in your homes, in your offices, so on and so forth. Does lectures, private demonstrations. He's a close friend of, as you can see in this picture, of Mark Twain, who's basically, having a light bulb that's sort of right here at his belly button, and it's being powered by this hula hoop of wire that you see Mark Twain is holding like this. He thinks it's a great idea. And, he does all the publicity, and in the middle of the 1890s, nobody comes along. No guy like George Westinghouse sort of says, son, I'm going to invest in that. I'll believe in that. So, Tesla's disappointed about this. Now, it's the period, from an economic standpoint, 1893 to 1896, 1897 is what's called the Panic of 1893. So it's a severe recession, second in American history, only to, in terms of severity, to the Great Depression. All right? So no investors come along. So frustrated as Tesla is, he says, well, what am I going to do now? So he goes back and he starts thinking about, how's this thing actually working? Now, we have to go back and think about Maxwell here for a minute. I guess this is physics lesson number 2. All right? Maxwell basically says that electromagnetic radiation, radio waves, and a whole other things, are across a wide spectrum, but they're electromagnetic waves, radio waves, are like light waves. And light waves travel in straight lines. Right? So Tesla gets to thinking. He says, so my Tesla coil, much like the this cone-shaped one that you see in the picture here, okay, all of those electromagnetic waves that are coming off with that big ball of sparks that at the top are going off in all sorts of directions, and and they're just going off into space. They're going beep 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 beep. Goodbye. And he says, a very small amount of energy is ever going to get to my receiver, to my light bulbs that I want to light up. This is a stupid idea. So he says, so what can I do? So he goes back and he thinks about his Tesla coil and he says, my Tesla coil produces two things. Produces that electromagnetic radiation, radio waves that are going off the top, and it produces a ground current that's going into the ground. He says, let's minimize the number of waves. Let's maximize the undulatory current that can be pumped into the ground. Okay. Now, many people love Tesla. And they think it is all about radio waves coming off that marvelous tower that I'll show you in a few minutes. My friends, as my old advisor would say, bless his heart, he would say, now, Bonnet, I cannot emphasize enough, and for you folks, I cannot emphasize enough that Nikola Tesla is not about radio waves flying across space, because he thought that they just all got lost. Okay, he is all about pumping energy into the crust of the earth. Hold that big thought. And if you hold that thought and you walk out the doors tonight, you've learned something new about Nikola Tesla. Okay, do you believe? Yes, you believe. Okay, well, we'll find out whether you believe later. I'll probably get some good questions, And the reason why I do these lectures is because this is how I learn new stuff. Is I go away and I think, oh, I missed that nuance of Tesla's engineering, his science. Okay, all right. Tesla gets to thinking about this. Minimize the radio waves, maximize the ground current. Okay, this means that he's thinking for a second time like a maverick. Okay, in the top image top diagram that we see here. Okay, is you got your transmitter, you got your receiver. Okay, basically in this particular version, which is what Marconi and all the other guys in this time period did, is basically they sent most of the energy up to the antenna as electromagnetic waves, radio waves. It went across the atmosphere, came to the receiver, was picked up by the antenna, and then you heard the music or you heard the message on that end, and the circuit was completed by basically having the receiver grounded and the transmitter grounded. Okay, so for everybody else, everything is happening in a clockwise fashion. Tesla's like, no. Okay, we're going to work in a counterclockwise fashion. So the transmitter is going to make a big undulatory current that is going to be pumped into the ground, is going to travel through the earth, beep, 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 is going to be picked up over here at your receiver, is going to, you're going to run your motors or your lights or whatever you want here. This is wireless power. And then you're going to have a return through the atmosphere. Okay? So this is his big idea. All right? And this is the money diagram. When I finally drew this, probably 20 years ago, it's like, yes, I finally understand what's going on here. Now, what's our friend Marconi doing? Okay, so Marconi is a younger guy. He basically grows up. His father is a landed aristocrat just outside of Bologna, Italy, in a little village which is now called Sasso Marconi. And his mother is Irish. His mother is a member of the Jameson family. Okay, so whenever you have a distilled beverage that comes in a green bottle from Ireland, and and you hoist one up, well, remember that the Jamesons were Marconi's mother's family. Okay, so he goes to England. He basically gets interested and tries to stay out of the line of fire with his dad, who really didn't take well to this particular son. So he basically hides in the attic, and he gets all interested in physics experiments. And the physics experiments he gets interested in are essentially redoing Hertz's apparatus, much like Tesla did. Now, Marconi from the get-go isn't thinking power, he's thinking messages. Okay, can I make a wireless telegraph system, wireless telegraphy? Okay, and to do that, he adds to the Hertz apparatus, which is his transmitting circuit. For the receiver, he uses a coherer, which is basically a tube filled with little metal chips. And when the tube detects the radio waves, yes, the receiver, basically the chips all line up. Okay? So it's a very crude way of measuring whether or not you got you're transmitting electromagnetic energy. Okay, so he works all of this out, and basically he's not getting on with his father. So so mom says, come on, we'll go for an extended holiday, and and then that extended holiday he stays in England, where his family, the Jamesons, basically decide to help him commercialize his inventions. And one of the first things that they do is they say, you need to go talk to one of the leading electrical engineers in Britain at that time, William Preece, who is the chief electrician at the British Post Office. Now, I only really mention Preece because one of the few letters where we begin to see the rivalry is a letter that Marconi writes to Preece in about 1897, where he basically says, it's been real, it's been nice, but it hasn't been real nice, and I actually want to go and set up a company with my mother's family, and create the wireless telegraph and signal company, which continues to this day as Marconi, as one form or another of Marconi and in the telecommunications field in the UK. But he tells Preece, I've decided to do this, as you can see in the quote, and I'll read the bottom half of the quote, because of the vigorous opposition made to me by Lodge in England, Oliver Lodge, another physicist who's working in the electromagnetic radiation field, Tesla in America, and others in Europe has induced me to take this step. Okay, so I basically right from the get-go, within a few years of getting started in radio, Marconi's looking over his shoulder and he's looking to see what's Tesla up to. So what Tesla think of Marconi? I love these two quotes. Okay, so in January of 1899, Tesla complains to one of the journals in the electrical engineering field, Electrical Review, and I love this quote, which is Tesla says, "One cannot help admiring the confidence and self-possession of experimenters," meaning Marconi, "who put forth carelessly such views, and who, with but a few days, not to say hours, experience with a device, venture before scientific societies and advance their imperfect results and opinions hastily formed. The sparks may be long and brilliant, the display interesting to witness, and the audiences may be delighted. But one must doubt the value of such demonstrations." Okay, you want to put down. Here's a put down. And then equally good, and further on in this same article, he describes Marconi's equipment as a worthless trap of interrupting circuits, which usually consume 9/10 of the energy, and it's just suitable, and this is the part I love, for the amusement of small boys who are just beginning their electrical experience. Okay, yeah. So we often think of we put people up like Marconi and Tesla, and we make them nice big statues, and no, we don't have. I thought we might have had Mr. Powell back there, but and we think that they're there's these sort of marble heroes. Well, here's flesh and blood Tesla, just being downright rude. Okay, but what's Marconi doing in the meantime? In the spring of 1899, Marconi's strategy with with the support of the Jamesons and the other investors in England is this: you go 1 mile, you go 5 miles between your transmitter and your receiver, you go 20 miles, and ultimately, in March of 1899, he sends a message across the English Channel, okay, for 32 miles. And this makes the newspapers and gets a fair amount of coverage in the U.S. Now, Tesla basically becomes worried that, maybe Marconi's actually getting somewhere. He's reading, Tesla's reading the papers and going, "It's all about Marconi. It's all about Marconi. What about me? I'm so special. What about me?" Okay. All right. So Tesla decides that I'm going to move to Colorado Springs because I'm going to conduct experiments on a larger scale. Okay, I made a lot of progress in figuring out things in New York, but there's too much electrical interference. There's telegraph wires, there's telephone wires, there's electric lights, okay? And all of these other systems are creating all of this noise, and so he can't really measure whether he's sending the energy that he wants through the ground. So off he goes to Colorado Springs, okay? And there, on the outskirts of town, in a cow pasture, he builds this experimental station, all right? And it looks out over basically the the eastern direction, out across the eastern third of Colorado towards, towards Kansas. I can't remember how far you can see, but you can see a long way. And one of the things, early things that he does is he starts watching thunderstorms as they move out of the Rockies and across the plains, okay? And as he's monitoring and listening with his devices planted into the ground, okay, he watches the lightning, and then he times and he calculates when does he get the signal back in the ground, because he wants to understand the ground currents. And this sort of listening to the lightning prompts him to realize, or makes him decide, that what's actually happening is when the lightning strikes, it sets off a stationary wave that travels through the Earth's crust. Okay, so the nodes always stay in the same place. That's what I mean by a stationary wave here. Okay, this is not a good physics lesson. This is not physics lesson number 3. Okay, all right. He further decides that that if I could create this standing wave by pumping electrical energy into the Earth periodically, much like the lightning storms are striking every so often, if I can kind of do this in a much more syncopated fashion than your random lightning storm, I could set up this standing wave of electrical energy that's traveling through the Earth's crust, but I got to do it at the resonant frequency of the Earth. Okay. Now, maybe not as an aside. What's the opposite of an aside? As another major point. Tesla is, and this this one's always fascinated me. How many people actually stop and say, I'm actually going to put the Earth, the entire Earth, in the middle of my experiment? Okay, not just this little corner over here. The whole thing, as they would say, the whole enchilada. Okay. So he figures out what he thinks is the resonant frequency of the Earth from an electromagnetic standpoint, and he says we got to, basically pump waves at a certain frequency, set up that resonant frequency in the Earth, and I can send energy anywhere. And by the way, I know this is another slide. By the way, without any losses. Okay, keep that little thought in mind. Okay, now was Tesla onto something? Yes, he was. Okay. You can send extremely low frequency waves, ELF waves, and if you pump them into the Earth, they travel in a space that is known as the Schumann cavity. All right. Now, what Tesla didn't know about at that time, nor did Marconi, was this thing called the ionosphere. The ionosphere is not identified. Okay, this charged level of the atmosphere. Okay, until something like 1915. All right, so all of this stuff with Marconi and what these other early radio guys are doing, they have no idea actually exactly how it works. Okay, but what happens with extra low frequency waves is these waves can be generated, and they can basically travel through bouncing, deep into the Earth's crust, deep into the ocean, and then bouncing back. And you can set them up, and they travel around the Earth. Now, why is this a good thing in the Cold War? Because if you have nuclear subs, as the little picture shows, you don't want those nuclear subs surfacing so the Soviets know where they are. So you want the nuclear subs to stay submerged, sailing around the world. But they have to know what's happening up here in the rest of the world. Okay, they need to know whether everything is okay. Because if it's not okay, they need to go on station and launch the missiles. So the extra low frequencies were used for the U.S. Navy from 1980s to 2004 to basically communicate a happy signal to the subs. And as long as the subs kept getting the happy signal, then they didn't go to station. They didn't let loose the nuclear missiles, and that's why we're still here. Now, there's probably somebody in this room who's had a classified role at the NRL or elsewhere in the military system who knows what happened after 2004, because basically the station at Clam Lake, okay, in northern Wisconsin, okay, is basically closed down. And so I have no idea, but somebody in this room probably knows how you actually get the messages going along. Okay. Now, again, Tesla thought this was a great idea, but he thought there weren't going to be any losses. You know, that you were going to be able to basically send energy anywhere you want around the world. Okay, am I doing all right on time there, Larry? Okay, that's good. I just want to make sure, if I'm doing the presentation, periodically I have to kind of come up and sort of say, you're doing all right, but, Okay, now to test out his ideas, Tesla builds the biggest Tesla coil ever, okay? It has a 50-foot circle in the middle of that building I showed you a little while ago, okay? And that's the primary. I keep hitting the wrong button. Thank God it doesn't do anything. That's the primary of this giant Tesla coil. And the secondary is a coil in here. And for various experiments, he adds coils to see what's going on. Now, under normal circumstances, if you were to go out and actually get to see what Tesla was doing in his laboratory at Colorado Springs, you wouldn't see anything. You just hear the stuff humming, okay? Because he's pumping the energy into the earth. And so all of these sparks that are shown in these photographs, and I'll show you a better one in a moment, are basically energy, as far as Tesla's concerned, is being wasted, okay? So basically, that's the transmitter. The receiver is a great big coil. He takes out in the middle of cow pasture, plops it down, remember, sticks it in the ground, so you don't have to have any sort of fancy schmancy antenna. That's the antenna up there, okay? And those are the Rockies in the background. And, and he's picking up enough energy to light that little light bulb up. Now, any number of you have probably seen the Tesla movie, the movie where David Bowie plays Tesla. And there is a beautiful scene in that movie where you see a snow-covered field with 200 light bulbs on it. The Prestige, thank you. Okay, never happened. Beautiful, looks great, never happened, okay? As far as I can tell in studying Tesla notes from Colorado Springs. Never happened. I know, breaking your heart, but there you go. Okay, so this is what the receiver does. Now, one of the weird things he does in Colorado Springs is in New York, he brings in all sorts of celebrities and reporters and investors to see what he's doing. In Colorado Springs, he doesn't let anybody see what he's looking at, okay? And in fact, his right-hand assistant, Fritz Lowenstein, and I do believe myself that that's Fritz, that's Mr. Lowenstein. Okay, I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty sure that's Fritz operating the transmitter. So Fritz would start running the transmitter, fire it up, and Tesla would trot out and look at those receivers they just showed you in the field and move them around and do different things and do some measurements. Okay? But Tesla then, because he never had any witnesses and he had never let the reporters come in, he had no witnesses. He had no publicity as to what he was doing in Colorado Springs. Not a good thing. Now, inventors often torture test their devices. And they play with them, and they play with them, and they play with them until they basically fall apart, okay? And the way they fall apart tells them what they need to do next to improve the invention, to improve the design, okay? And what they're doing is this what Karl Popper, the philosopher of science, told us about millions, years and years and years ago, is they're disconfirming your designs. Why do we think as a scientist it's a good theory is we can't eventually disconfirm it. We can't prove it wrong. So at that point, we think it's actually got to be right? But you're always trying to disconfirm it to basically make sure that you're on the right track. Okay, Tesla went in a different direction in Colorado Springs. He became convinced that if he could transmit currents in the earth over short distances, maybe a mile or so, from his experimental station across those pastures, then he could do it around the world. You do it for a mile, we can do it, do it around the whole planet. In other words, he pursued a confirmatory strategy that kept him from seeing problems with his wireless power scheme. Okay. In 1900, I wanted to come back. I wanted to just tell you about this picture here. Okay, so I told you that if you basically went to Colorado Springs, you wouldn't see anything going on there. But he needed some kind of evidence to prove that there was something really cool happening, and he was dealing with huge amounts of high voltages and huge amounts of energy. So he would basically adjust the circuitry so that you got these gigantic, that's probably a 45-foot lightning bolt going from this part of the secondary out to a coil or a receiver here inside there, and back behind him you can see the high wall. That's the other part of the magnifying transmitter, the giant Tesla coil. Now, this is an incredibly cool picture. Okay, and I know I'm breaking your heart, but you gotta love Tesla. I'm gonna break your heart. Anybody know how this picture was taken? This is a double exposure. Okay, so it basically on a glass plate. So the photographer basically, Tesla's back behind the camera. That's Tesla sitting in the picture. So picture the first exposure, you basically take a picture of Tesla sitting in the chair. All right, got it backwards. Okay, then Tesla gets out of the chair and cranks up the magnifying transmitter, the Tesla coil, and you get the big lightning bolts. But it looks really cool that he's sitting there quietly reading, and all this stuff is happening. You want a picture of mastery of the forces of nature. Boy, that's the picture for you. Okay. So in 1900, Tesla goes back to New York, and he calls on the reporters and he says, "Boys," most of the reporters in those days were boys. He says, "Boys, I'm going to send a message across the Atlantic in 8 months. Count on it." And he writes a 35-page article. The problem of increasing human energy for what was then kind of the equivalent of Harper's or the Atlantic of its day, Century Magazine. He was good friends with the editor. Okay, but he talks about everything. And he basically argues that, he has solved all the problems of the world with various inventions that he's come up with. Tesla's utterly convinced that he's solved the problem of wireless power. So he moves into the best hotel in New York, the Waldorf Astoria. Okay, he basically dines at Delmonico's. He wears the best clothes. He's regarded as one of the best dressed men in Manhattan. Okay, he's seen as as the celebrity inventor. Okay, and he, by the way, reports that while he was in while he was in Colorado Springs, I heard messages, radio messages from Mars. Just wanted to let you know. Okay. All right. And all of this adds up to, the fact that he gets caught up with the illusion of what he's doing. Okay. And if you say and you do all the right things, then the technology and commercial success must ultimately follow. Now, at one level, commercial success did fall in his lap. J.P. Morgan, the most powerful man on Wall Street in those days, basically agreed to loan him $150,000 to build another experimental station on the north shore of Long Island called Wardenclyffe, and that's the power station. There's the tower. Okay, now let me put $150,000 in the world of J.P. Morgan into perspective. Sight on the scene, J.P. Morgan's agent in London buys a famous painting, The Duchess of Devonshire, for $150,000, right about the same time. Okay, so this is a huge amount of money for Tesla, a small amount of money for Morgan. Now Tesla is just overwhelmed by Morgan's generosity, and he says, "Morgan, Mr. Morgan, thank you." And the paperwork comes from Morgan's office, and for the loan, and basically there's an open line, in the basically the term it's basically the term sheet for the deal, and Tesla, Morgan's banker says, "Well, you got to fill that in," and Tesla writes in 51% of the patent rights. Okay, hold that little thought, because this gets him into big trouble. Right? So he begins, with the help of Stanford White, the famous architect from McKim, Mead and White, to build this station. And White is a great architect, but what do architects do? They spend your money. Okay, and so he basically goes through this money pretty damn quick, building this power station. This building, by the way, still stands. Okay, and they're busy restoring it. And I can tell you a little bit more about it, in the Q&A. The tower gets blown up in World War I. Okay, now We always think about the tower and you think, man, that's really cool. Okay, what we don't think about is down underneath the tower is a 120-foot deep shaft with 16 iron pipes that go shooting out the bottom. Because remember, what he's trying to do is pump electrical currents into the earth. As he says, I want to get a grip on the earth and shake it. All right. Now, remember Marconi? Oh, yeah, this is a story about the race between two rivals. Oh, yeah. So what's Marconi doing? Okay, so Marconi's, he's reading the papers, and it's like, and he's hearing rumors that Tesla's out building this laboratory, in the North Shore of Long Island. And so Tesla basically, Marconi basically has been, going, 30 miles, 50 miles, 60 miles. And he suddenly, much to the chagrin of his business advisors, Marconi says, we got to do the big thing. Oh, what do you mean by the big thing? We got to beat Tesla, and we got to be the first to get across the Atlantic, sending a message. So Marconi hires the best electrical power engineer in the UK, a man named J. Ambrose Fleming. And Fleming basically says to Marconi, we're going to completely redesign the transmitter. No more cheap batteries. We're going to build a big honking generator, a big dynamo, and we're going to power that so that you've got, your transmitter's got enough energy to basically reach across the Atlantic. They do it in Cornwall at a place called Poldhu, is the transmitting station, and Marconi builds a great big antenna array. All of these, about 10 flagpoles, 50 feet high, with wires running across them. Builds one there, and he builds one in Cape Cod. Okay. Now, before he can actually transmit, a storm not only knocks down the antenna array in Cornwall, it also knocks down the one in Cape Cod. So Marconi's thinking, oh man, what am I going to do now? He hops on a ship and he goes to the closest point to Europe in North America, which is St. John's, Newfoundland. Okay, and there he flies a kite up into the sky. I fussed with this picture, but there's the string, and up there in the clouds is the kite. Okay, and on the 12th of December, Marconi hears a message from Cornwall, England. What Marconi has said is twice a day at certain specific times, I want you to send the signal in Morse code for the letter S. And on the 12th of December, Marconi and his assistant Kemp hear the three faint dots representing the message S. The next day, he goes to the telegraph office. He basically writes a PR story, puts it on the wire. The following day, it's on the front page of the newspaper in New York. Okay, and Marconi's reputation just takes off from there. Okay, and everybody assumes that Marconi has succeeded, and Tesla has nothing to show for it. He's got zip. Okay, but I love this picture, and I wish I made it a little bit bigger for you. But there's Marconi in Newfoundland, having heard the message, and he's sitting there looking like the Cheshire Cat. I love it. It's one of those great pictures. Again, it takes the guy off the marble, takes him off the pedestal. He's not a bad guy, but that's there he is. Okay, now you've been scooped by Marconi, this guy that you basically said, he's nothing. Don't worry about him. So what do you tell J.P. Morgan, the most powerful man in the world? Well, remember, this is the guy that basically looked at his physics professor back in college and he said, I'm going to prove you wrong. Same sort of intellectual courage. Tesla basically writes a letter to Morgan in January 1902, and he basically says, we're going to have a world telegraphy system. I want you to think about it, Mr. Morgan. We're going to have a handful of power plants, one located outside each major city, New York, Paris, Tokyo, London. And they're going to be able to transmit messages to every part of the globe. We're going to pump them into the earth, okay? And they will be connected to the city, and as fast as they get telegrams or they get newspaper stories or they get anything else, they're going to pump it into the ground. And on the other end, everybody's going to have, as it says there, a receiver no bigger than a pocket watch. All right? This is 1902. All right? I want you to think. I want you to think about that for a minute, my friends. Okay. All right. But he closes it, and I love this line. The whole earth is like a brain, as it were, and the capacity of this system is infinite, meaning as many messages as you want. You see, Mr. Morgan, the revolutionary character of this idea. It's civilizing potency. It's tremendous money-making power. 1902, the idea that we'd have something like a smartphone. Now, what did people imagine that it looked like? And I love this is one of my other all-time, after the Marconi picture, looking like he's just swallowed the cat that swallowed the mouse. Is this? And they got this wrong. But imagine, the reporters are basically saying, oh, look, there's Tesla's tower, and it's beaming energy to all of these nice people. So you're out camping here, and you may not be able to see this real well, and you want energy, for your campsite. So you just basically get a great big tent pole, and you ram it into the ground, and you get energy, okay? Or you're on your yacht, okay, and there you are, and the energy's coming down, and you're getting it through the mast, okay? But the one I love best, of course, is the one in the middle there, which is the lady who's on vacation. Maybe it's Saratoga Springs, and she wants to get a message from her friends in the city, and she holds up her parasol, and she's got her little receiver somewhere in her pocket. Okay, a vision of a world telegraphy system. So Morgan says, well, this is all right. Now, I'm not going to give you a whole lot of money, but we'll set up a stock company, and you can basically sell the stock, and we'll see where we can go. Okay, so they plan to make the money not on the transmission side, but on the receiver side. Okay, at the same time, another up-and-coming electrical inventor who subsequently invents the vacuum tube, Lee DeForest, who wanted to work for Tesla, applied for the job with Tesla, and Tesla said, thanks, but no thanks twice to Lee DeForest. So anyhow, Lee DeForest falls in with this guy, Abraham White, who is just a shark. Okay. And DeForest and White set up a radio company, an whole set of subsidiaries, and they basically sell stock shares to everybody. And they say, it's the next big thing. It's going to be marvelous, and you want to get in on the ground floor. And they just did this over and over again, and just basically oversold the business. Okay, and then White ran off with the money. The rest of Wall Street looks at this and basically says, this is speculation, pure and simple. This is the stuff that it makes people hate Wall Street. Okay, and so in Tesla's own words, he said Morgan and the rest of Wall Street wouldn't touch wireless companies with a 20-foot pole. Okay. In other words, even Tesla realized that what was happening was basically poisoning the well for him and for Marconi to raise any money. Now, in 1903, Morgan says, "You know what? I'm done. I've got bigger fish to fry. The federal government is coming after me. About a major case. It looks a lot like the attack on Rockefeller and Standard Oil. I basically got to keep my nose clean, right? So Tesla basically fires off letters to Morgan, and some of them are like, Mr. Morgan, you're such a wonderful guy. Won't you help me out a little bit more? And then others are like, you don't know how sad I am, and I cry myself, honest to God, I cry myself to sleep, and it's just so terrible. And then there's another letter. It's like, Mr. Morgan, you are the richest man in the world, and I am the smartest inventor in the world, and we ought to be working together. And you're a fool if you don't help me. So, I mean, these letters, I mean, would be, make a psychiatrist, it'd be a delight for a psychiatrist to analyze. Okay. He also is trying to raise money. So he goes to a whole different bunch of bankers. Let me make sure I'm not getting ahead of my story. Yes, this is where I got to tell you this part of the story. My apologies. And he says, look, Morgan's out, but, you could, come on, you could invest in me. And they said, and he basically does the pitch every major figure in Wall Street at that time, and they go, okay, radio's coming along. This is new disruptive technology. It looks good. There's some scumbags out there, DeForest and White, but maybe we'll come in. And then they look at the fine print and they say, but you only own 49% of the patents. So if I invest money, basically, Morgan's going to wind up with a share of this money that I'm investing in because he holds 51% of the patent portfolio. Thanks, but no thanks. Okay, so he basically hoisted himself up on his own petard. Okay. At the same time, all of this is happening. Tesla finds out that his closest friend, a naval war hero, handsome guy, as you can see in the picture, Richmond P. Hobson, has decided to run for Congress and to look respectable. He's going to marry Griselda. Okay, and Griselda is a character and a half. All right, but it breaks Tesla's heart. And and Hobson writes him a letter, and he says, I got to tell you, I'm going to get married to Griselda, but I have to tell you that you Tesla. This is Hobson writing. You Tesla occupy the deepest chambers of my heart. Okay, so you can imagine just, you can't get the money. You're having problems getting things working out in Wardenclyffe. And your best friend, is basically going to run off, is basically going to get married. Okay, so he has a nervous breakdown, and he writes letters basically signing them Nikola busted. Okay, now, I suppose this is, now I've lost count. I don't know if this is physics lesson 3 or for number 4, but who cares? We love physics. Okay, now, inquiring minds want to know, would Wardenclyffe have worked? Okay. And the question you have to ask yourself, or I had to ask myself as a researcher, as I said, now, does the Earth behave from an electromagnetic standpoint like a water balloon or the ocean? Okay? Now, this is all about, is the Earth, from an electromagnetic standpoint, filled with a compressible or an incompressible fluid? Tesla thought that the Earth was filled with an incompressible fluid, okay, from an electromagnetic standpoint, okay? So he's thinking about picture on the left, okay? His transmitting station, there's his transmitting station, but his transmitting station over here is imagine you've got a little hand pump, and you're pumping fluid, energy, into the water balloon, okay? There's your water balloon. And if you eventually get your timing right, get it to you're pumping at the resonant frequency of the Earth or the water balloon, what eventually happens? At all of those receiving stations, which in the analogy are little one-way valves, you pump once, the water squirts out each of those receiving stations. Pump it again, pops out, okay, with no losses. The problem is, my friends, if I understand the geophysics of this is the Earth is not, from an electromagnetic standpoint, filled with an incompressible fluid. It's filled with a compressible fluid. So, I grew up in New Jersey, as I may have mentioned earlier. Okay, and one of the things we would do is stand on the beach, and we'd have these big discussions. Is if we threw a rock, into the ocean on a calm day, and it started skipping and and made waves, would the waves go all the way to Spain? Would they travel across the Atlantic? No, because the fluid, the ocean would absorb the energy, and so eventually the waves would peter out. Okay, and that's what would have happened. Okay, this is to say nothing of the other problem for Wardenclyffe, which I don't have a slide for, is how do you actually get the energy to leave those big iron pipes and go zooming off through the Earth's crust? He never figured that one out. Okay. So, I have to finish the story about Marconi. Okay, so in 1903, the Kaiser in Germany, basically, and this is the run-up, the big military run-up to World War I. Okay, Germany and Britain are basically vying as world powers. Okay, and the Brits, the British have Marconi Wireless, and they're using this to develop Marconi Wireless for ship-to-ship communication, ship-to-shore communications. Okay, so Germany thinks, well, we got to have a German Navy, and we got to have radio too. We got to have wireless. So they create Telefunken. In 1911, Telefunken creates a subsidiary in America called the American Communication Company, and they retain Tesla as a consultant. 1914, World War I breaks out, and the very first thing that the British do is they cut the cables from Germany to the United States, because the British want to manage the news and the propaganda about what's happening in what's happening in the war. Okay, as part of that strategy of controlling the information coming to the United States, Marconi Wireless sues American Communications to prevent the Germans from sending messages from their transmitters to a station that they built in New Jersey, and sending news that way. Okay, so they basically decide they're going to go after a legal case. Both companies bring out the big guns, bring out their superstars. Marconi Wireless brings Marconi over from Italy to the United States, to New York for this case, and Tesla testify. Okay, and the case is not going. My reading of the case, is it doesn't actually go all that well for Marconi, and all of a sudden, the war begins. Italy enters the war, and Marconi suddenly has to go home and serve in the Italian Navy, and so the case fizzles out. Okay. But the case was not going well for Marconi. Now, this emboldens Tesla. So that case fizzles out. So Tesla says, fine. Marconi can sue me. I'm going to sue Marconi. And I'm going to challenge Marconi's 1904 fundamental American patent. Okay? And he testifies and he puts the case together. At the tail end, as soon as the war is over, American Marconi sues the United States government for damages. Okay, this is part of the legal case that I've never exactly gotten as to why American Marconi thought that they could basically sue the United States government, but they do. In the meantime, all of the patents, including Marconi's patents, get basically put into a pool that where American Marconi, GE, AT&T, and Westinghouse create RCA, the Radio Corporation of America. Okay, in 1930, and basically that 1917 case just keeps going through the courts and finally gets to the U.S. Court of Claims in 1935. And they basically say, Marconi should not have gotten this fundamental patent because it was anticipated by Tesla and Lodge and a number of other early inventors. And that case wins its way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And as part of an antitrust case for RCA, the Supreme Court basically says, yes, Marconi's fundamental patent should never have been issued, okay? But your Tesla fans basically say, see, Tesla really invented radio because the Supreme Court said so. And I wasn't sure that I ever thought that the Supreme Court should make a decision like that, but there you go. Okay. So, who invented radio? Now, never mind what the Supreme Court said. Okay? It depends what you mean by radio. Are we talking about a system of transmitting messages using electromagnetic waves? Okay, that's one definition. You have a simple definition of radio and say, it's the box that picks up broadcast programs, okay, that we have in our homes. Or, is it the basic idea of using electromagnetic waves to do useful work? All right. If it's a system of transmitting messages, then Marconi is the right answer. Remember, he wanted wireless telegraphy. He had a vision. That's what he wanted to do. You want the second definition, okay, box in your house. You got a whole other group of people you have to talk about. Reginald Fessenden, DeForest, Edwin Armstrong, David Sarnoff, president of the RCA. But if you want the third definition, okay, of the basic idea that you could do something technologically with electromagnetic waves, then Tesla is your guy. Okay. Now, you sort of say, it's been a long day. Why do we need a story about radio with both Tesla and Marconi? Okay. And the answer is that they both started with the same science. Okay, sorry. Okay, but they went in very different ways. Okay, and we need to avoid falling into the trap of technological determinism. Okay, that that the history can only fall out in a particular way. This is what the science says, and that's the way the technology has to take shape. And we do tend to fall back, and the patent system is built this way. The U.S. patent system is built this way, on a heroic myth of invention. That a great invention is the result of a single genius. There's only one father. Okay, but so what? Okay, what I want you to walk away with is start to think about that. Major technologies involve multiple steps, twists and turns I've been telling you about tonight, multiple actors. They both started in the same place. Marconi and Tesla was Hertz's apparatus, but they interpreted it in very different ways, and their personalities play an important part in the story. So you might sort of say, there's a lot of wireless power going on today. And indeed, I gave a lecture 2 years ago at Wireless Power Week, where there were 5,000 engineers in Denver, all talking about wireless power and the way it could be used in all sorts of different ways. And there are basically two different ways you can do it. There's near field and far field. Near field is what Tesla was doing early on with his electric lights, okay? You basically got an electric field that's set up, and in that electric field, you can be able to do inductive coupling between coils of wire, okay? And if you have one of those little trays that you can, you come home and you put your cell phone on it, and it charges the phone without plugging it in. That's inductive coupling. Okay, there's a coil in the back of your smartphone. There's a coil in a little tray, and the two talk to each other, and they transfer the energy. Okay, you may have noticed that it takes longer when you basically use the little tray than if you plug your phone into a cord. Far field is what he was going to do with Wardenclyffe, which is you're going to send electromagnetic radiation, and you could do it with microwaves, you could do it with laser beams, and you could do it longer, but far field, you have to be able to focus the beam, so it doesn't dissipate as it goes through the atmosphere. Same problem as Tesla had with Wardenclyffe. Okay. Tesla had that nervous breakdown in 1905, never was the same, about 1905, never was the same since. He gets better, he works on small minor things. He lives in a variety of hotels in New York where he periodically moves whenever he, they present him with the bill and he has no money to pay it. And he does this over and over and over again, okay? And there's a great story about probably his last illusion that I can tell you about. And he finally passes away in 1943 when he's living in the Hotel New Yorker. And you can, for sizable, appropriate sum of money, you can actually sleep in the room where Tesla died. I, by the way, have not done this, nor do I wish to do this. That whole idea just weirds me out. Okay, there are many things I wanted to do, but that's not one of them. After Tesla died, I'm mixing things up here. At one of his birthday parties in 1934, the reporters all come in and they say, "So what's new?" And he says, "I developed a particle beam weapon that's going to basically protect the United States from being attacked by bombers." Okay, and everybody goes, "Oh." Okay, anyhow, Tesla dies. J. Edgar Hoover basically says, "We're taking no chances." And the U.S. government seizes Tesla's papers. Now, conspiracy people just love this. If they seize the papers, there's really got to be something there. Oh, my God. Okay. And there wasn't anything there. Okay. But they held on to the papers until the 1950s. And in the early 1950s, the U.S. government finally gives the papers to the people of Yugoslavia, and they now sit in a museum that you can visit in Belgrade. Okay. So let me finish up. What would Tesla be doing today? He'd be looking at a major theme, particularly probably about how people are accessing vast amounts of information using personal devices. He'd be all over this. He'd probably be thinking and commenting on AI. And he'd be using a mix of science and popular culture, just was his forte. Thinking about what's going on in people's minds. What are they excited about? And he'd enjoy still being an outsider and a maverick. But above all, what I learned is he'd be asking us to do two things simultaneously. Dream boldly, as he did, but think hard, think rigorously. And I leave you with this picture, which is a composite, okay, but it captures an important point. All of those electric lights that you see on that picture, all those lights around the world, most of them are powered by the alternating current that Tesla pioneered. As John Stone said, I think we all misunderstood Tesla. We thought he was a dreamer and a visionary. He did dream, and his dreams came true. He did have visions, but they were of a real future, not an imaginary one. Thank you very much. I'm not going anywhere.
So, we have time for some questions if you're interested. We have a procedure here. There are people with microphones, generally 2 microphones. One is red, one is blue. I will call on you when you get a microphone by the color of your microphone. And when I do, you please stand up. Please tell us your name. Please tell us if you're a member, and then ask a question. Ask a question. Save the commentary for the social hour. So if you will bring a microphone to somebody with their hand up. The microphones are on, so don't play around with the on-off switch.
Yeah.
We do it this way because the person in the back of the room will leave the microphone on of the person who's asking a question and turn the microphone off for the one who's not. That way, when you make your catty comments, it doesn't show up on the video and be listened to by 100,000 people. Red microphone.
My name is Joe Foreman. I am a life member, for that matter. And my question has to do with this patent business, because you can't patent a concept. You can only patent a device that works. So Tesla could have had all kinds of ideas, but I don't understand the Supreme Court's decision, because Marconi actually had devices that work. So that's my question. How did the Supreme Court come to that conclusion? Because you have to convince nowadays, you don't have to build a device nowadays, but you have to convince the patent examiner that it will work.
Yeah.
But back in those days, you had to build a device.
Yeah, you had to build a device, or you had to provide scientific evidence that you had conducted experiments so that you would reduce the idea, as you say, the concept to practice.
Well, I thought that back in the day, you actually had to build a device, that the patent office, there are all these devices that people invented that are there. And then only in recent years could you say, well, by reasoning and modeling and so forth.
No, even in Tesla's time, based on reading dozens of patent files, they basically, he lays it out, and the examiner goes back and forth with Tesla and with his lawyers and says, do you have evidence? Can you, is this actually, a plausible, credible device that's actually going to work? But he did not necessarily have to produce a model for each and every sort of design. But we can. That's my understanding of the of the history. So, but later on, you're right. It does change.
It's certainly the case there was more requirement back then for models, but that doesn't mean that you had to have a model for everything.
Yeah, but the model requirement disappears in the 1870s. I can't tell you the exact date, but model is only required after about 1875 if the patent examiner actually asks for it. Okay, and as near as I can tell, there never were any surviving patent models from Tesla's various patents. But he provides evidence, and he does secure a patent for some of the circuitry that he has for Wardenclyffe, and Marconi, secures certain patents for for devices that he's actually built. So, okay.
Blue microphone.
Right. Hi there, my name is Akesh Malia. I'm not a member, unfortunately, but hopefully sometime soon. I was wondering, so you mentioned that great inventors are often people who revolutionize business and how it's done. And so I was wondering, especially in the instances of Marconi's business, for example, or that Telefunken company that you mentioned as well, who were their first initial customers, and how quickly did they revolutionize how business was done, especially in the age of the telegraph?
Okay, a very good question. One of the things that Marconi and his associates did is you have to basically, and this is what I teach innovators today, is you have to have a target market where ideally you have no competition. Okay, and Marconi and his associates focused on ship-to-shore communications. Okay, and as a result, we're able to sell it to shipping companies and to the British Navy and to the Italian Navy, because basically then the ship could be out there and it could be communications. And indeed, it was in 1912, in the tragedy of the Titanic, they actually had a Marconi wireless transmitting station on the ship, but it was there to basically send telegrams, basically from rich people that are on the ship saying, having a wonderful time. And they basically closed it down at like 10 o'clock at night, and of course at 11 o'clock they hit the iceberg. And they had to open it up, and and there were a limited number of ships that could hear the emergency message. But they picked. You're absolutely right. You pick a very specific targeted market. Tesla, because he thought Morgan would help him figure out that target market, but Morgan was not interested in having that close a role with Tesla as Marconi's backers were. But the target market is a critical part of the story. Okay.
Red microphone.
Red mic.
Bernie, Ed Grosvenor.
Ed, it's great to see you.
Always great to hear you. Another great talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to come to the defense of a former PSW member. Your third definition of radio,
Okay.
using electromagnetic waves as a medium to transmit, to communicate.
Right.
Bell demonstrated his photophone in front of this society in 1880. That's 20 years before. That's the
1877.
transmission of voice over light waves, over electromagnetic waves, 20 years before. So isn't that the first?
Yes, you are correct that I should basically figure out how to work Mr. Alexander Graham Bell into the story, but in the interest of trying to get you to think about what do we mean by doing something with electromagnetic waves, and in particular, I hadn't thought about Bell because I was not thinking about he was thinking about light waves, and I've been thinking about radio waves. In other words, a different portion of the electromagnetic spectrum. However, your point is correct that that light waves are part of the electromagnetic spectrum, and Bell should be talked about as an example of the third definition. Now, what would you tell that young man about the target audience or target market for the photophone? Am I allowed to ask questions of the audience?
Well,
Ed and I can debate this. Ed and I go way back.
It's the precursor of fiber optics. He transmitted voice over light waves for 400 yards from his L Street telegraph, L Street office to the school.
He is worthy of more attention for that invention that we normally give him. And you were right to bring it up and to remind the PSW that that it was the second time that Mr. Bell brought an amazing invention before this illustrious body.
May I do one more quick question?
If it's a question.
Use of electromagnetic waves, also his induction balance of 1881, which was the first metal detector to try to save Garfield's life was the use of the balance of two electromagnetic fields. So isn't that almost a decade before Hertz and,
All right, so
and Hertz and
all right,
Tesla?
All right, so yeah, so we over cold refreshing beverages we can dive into this. I don't know as much about the electromagnetic induction balance, but I am thinking about radiation. So that's why I'm happy to concede the point about light waves and the photophone, but I'm not sure that there's waves of radiation involved in the electromagnetic induction balance. But boy, oh boy, I better have my physics straight when we get that. But who's next?
Blue microphone.
On the blue side.
Blue microphone.
Okay,
John Bozeman.
Mr. Bozeman.
Are you a member? or
Do you
not?
want to? We much like Mr. Grosvenor, Mr. Bozeman and I have a long and happy history, and in fact, some of the very first research that I did on Tesla, I had Mr. Bozeman's help.
Oh, shucks.
Shucks. All right, but his mind is like a steel trap. Now, a good question from you, sir.
No pressure. I'm not currently a member of PSW, but my question was there, what effect did the discovery of the ionosphere have, if any, on Tesla's thinking?
So by that time, the ionosphere is discovered by A.E. Kennelly in about 1915. And by that time, Tesla has basically lost control, has no money to actually pursue big projects relating to radio waves or electromagnetic waves. And so as a result, it doesn't change the sort of engineering work that he's doing. He's on to basically bladeless turbines and other small actually mechanical engineering projects. What's interesting is in 1905, or whenever Marconi wins, the side story about the ionosphere is whenever Marconi actually wins, and I've forgotten what year it is, he wins the Nobel Prize. Marconi uses his speech, before the Nobel Award, to basically try to explain away how his system is working, because he doesn't have the ionosphere to explain the fact that the reason why we can listen to radio all around the world is the waves bounce off the ionosphere and keep going around and around. Okay, but Marconi did not know that. And so it was a big breakthrough for Marconi and Marconi engineers to suddenly know about the ionosphere. So it made a big difference for them. Okay.
Red microphone. Cyprian.
Ciprian Ivanov, member. Probably the simpler question is, even if the Earth is a non-compressible fluid, wouldn't the waves from various stations interfere with each other and make it impractical to work as a transmission medium?
Okay. So there are two answers to this. Okay. Answer A is if we're just sending power, okay, then you just need one frequency, okay, and Tesla was mostly thinking about power. He did think about, and one of the ways that, the reason why, we will actually all go home and sleep in our beds tonight is one thing I did not talk about was the fact that Tesla actually figured out a technique for tuning, which he proposed to use, which was actually just as good as the tuning techniques that Marconi developed. But to basically work tuning into this lecture, we'd be here for another 20 minutes. Okay.
Second question is, how could he have persuaded himself that transmission would be lossless?
So, I think that
He's
the
very
answer
unique in
is
that
I don't honestly know, but it has to do with what I can say is it has to do with his conception of basically creating these standing waves. Okay, but why he actually came to the point where he thought there were going to be no losses is I've never been you're right, it's a very good question. I've never been able to come up with a simple answer as to why he was utterly confident in that. And it's now been a number of years. I'd have to even go back and think about where I'd go looking for any insight into that. So it's probably the Colorado Springs notebooks.
We're going to go
Okay.
blue microphone, and then we're going to go take a couple of questions from our online audience. Blue microphone.
Blue microphone.
Paulos, I'm a member. I just purchased your book as I normally do for these lectures, and it begs the question regarding target audience. I noticed it just changed the graphic, but I noticed there's several low-density languages up there. Serbian and Croatian, I well understand, but pourquoi there's no French? And I checked online. There's no French as well.
Yeah, and you were absolutely right. I mean, I managed to get, it's not up to me. It's up to the publishers, and basically it's a publisher in each individual country that basically bought the rights of the American edition from Princeton University Press, and and I think it's. I think the answer, other people may have interesting insights in it. I think the answer is French history of science is very French. Okay, they and so you want 7 billion books on Pasteur, no problem. Okay, you want a book on obscure electrical inventors. They're not obscure, but they're names that we don't talk about every day, like Ampere or Foucault. There's plenty of work on that. But French history of science tends to be very nationalistic. That's the way I've interpreted that. The other oddball thing is this: after it was the first foreign language edition was was the Croatian edition, and then the second one was Spanish, and the Spanish edition is of all the foreign language editions is the only one that's gone into a second edition. Why, I do not know. Okay.
Web questions. We'll take 2.
All right. The first question is from Michael Hocken, a member from Silver Spring, Maryland. Why did Tesla think, much less be so certain, that EM waves were longitudinal? Getting into the mind of Tesla.
Digging into the mind of Tesla. So, all right. So the answer is the answer is I think it's I'm admit that at the time that I wrote the book in before 2012, I had more insight as to how it had to do with what he was observing with the Geissler tubes. Well, what exactly he was observing with the Geissler tubes that prompted him to think about longitudinal waves is not clear to me. The interesting thing is that Hertz decided that, I got that wrong. Tesla went with transverse waves, the waves like this. Have I got that? Yeah, because something he saw at the Geissler tube. Hertz was sure that they were the other waveform because he could use a polarizer and basically show that you could control the direction of the waves. So he could, he knew that they were longitudinal. Have I got that right? Yeah. Okay. But the part of it is, and the interesting question is, which I never got an answer, is why Tesla never did the polarizing experiment. But it could be that Hertz, a lot of these early electrical inventors or electrical science physicists were basically guys that started in optics. Okay, and so when they worked on electricity, they basically used a lot of techniques that they carried over from optics into electricity. One of my favorite chapters in a very early physics book that I used to consult you had the chapters on thermodynamics, and you had on mechanics, and you had on this and that. Electricity, magnetism, and light were always in a chapter. This is an 1870s physics textbook titled "The Physics of the Imponderable." Okay, and so techniques that were used to make sense of the physics of the imponderable carried over from one area to the other. So, okay.
Next question from the web.
Second question from the web is from Dave Rabinowitz, a member streaming from Oregon. Can you think of contemporary personalities comparable to Marconi and Tesla?
So,
Gee, that's a
Yeah.
tough one.
so I mean, I think that there's, there have been rivalries, and one of the rivalries, it's more of a business than a technological one, is in the early years, the computer industry is Jobs and Gates had very different visions of what the personal computer ought to be, and how to bring it to market, and and that certainly is one example. There are rival people and I happen to sit on the selection board of the National Inventors Hall of Fame, and one of the biggest challenges that we had over the years is have we inducted the right people for the invention of the laser? Okay, because there are multiple people that you actually have to think about that were all in the 1950s and early 1960s working on lasers, and so that's a particularly good example. Those are the ones that immediately come to mind for our friend from away. And if I think of another one, I will tell the president.
No, there's lots
Not
of
the
them.
president here, of course.
Okay, last question is going to be the red microphone. Red microphone, yeah, that one.
Here we are.
David Rosen.
Make it good.
Thank you. David Rosen, member. Why and how did Tesla come to badmouth Albert Einstein? What was the matter?
Okay, so the first part of it, yes. So basically what David is asking about is in the 1920s, after general relativity had been announced, and Einstein became a big newsworthy figure, Tesla basically sort of said, I don't think relativity counts, and so pay no heed. And the sad part is based on a very old-fashioned notion of 19th century physics, okay, which is and again Tesla's physics was pretty, in certain ways, even in his own time, was fairly rudimentary. People were always sort of saying, there must be lots of equations and calculations and this and that and the other thing with Tesla. And you go through his notebooks, and there is the math is pretty simple arithmetic or even a little bit of algebra, but that's it. Okay, there is no sophisticated mathematics. So Einstein comes along with this entirely non-Newtonian way of seeing the world, and Tesla is always looking for the limelight, and I think sadly he basically badmouths, as you say, Einstein simply because he's jealous and he wishes that he wants to have some similar news coverage, because he's fallen. What happens is he is really in some ways one of the first scientific celebrities, in the U.S. You can make a similar argument for Alexander Graham Bell, but Tesla really takes it to the next level. Joseph Henry. Okay, but by 1905. By 1905, 1907, Tesla basically, the press turns on him and says, you haven't proven anything. And Tesla never gets over having lost that, being the darling of the press. And so he basically has no use for, relativity or quantum mechanics. So, good.
All right.
Great
Well,
questions.
thank you.
Thank you.
Before you go, we do have some gifts of appreciation for coming here and spending time, and for your book. And one of them is a framed copy of the announcement of your lecture here, signed by all the members of the General Committee on behalf of all the members. Another is a copy of Volume 17 of the PSW Science Bulletin. This is a compendium volume. Being a historian, you'll be interested. There are 3 histories of PSW, a list of our Henry speakers, Nobel Prize winners, and a few pairings of talks from the early days with talks from more recent times. For instance, an early talk describing the transmission of malaria, and a much later talk describing a method for preventing the malaria parasite from infecting the vector. And a ribbon of PSW, which has on its side 3 bars evocative of the symbol for inductance, named for
Joseph
Henry, the unit being the Henry, and Joseph Henry being the founder of PSW.
Well,
A very
thank you.
famous scientist of his time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you all for
So thank
coming
you.
tonight. Thank you.
Before you go, audience, there are a few closing announcements that won't take long. Our next talk will be by Gordon Guyette. If you don't know, he is extremely well known in medicine for developing evidence-based medicine, a phrase that he coined, and for developing the GRADE framework for basically presenting the, how shall we say, strength of clinical studies that turn into the recommendations of various groups on how to use these clinical study results in the clinic. And he's also a very big proponent of the relationship between patients and patient agency and making choices in view of accurate information about clinical studies and outcomes and side effects in the clinic. So we're really lucky to have him come, actually. And I hope you'll all come in and hear him talk. Other upcoming talks, we have Stephen Eckel, who's basically going to talk about how you measure the metric of nothingness. How do you measure a vacuum? How do you know how empty your vacuum is? And he's had some recent improvements in that. We're going to have Karen Lloyd coming to talk on organisms that live deep in the earth, have very slow metabolisms, and seem to live for very, very long periods of time. Another example of extremophiles, and adding to our pantheon of organisms that 50 years ago we had no idea existed. And that extends our possibilities for where life may exist on our own planet, but also on other bodies in the universe. And then we're going to have this newly added Amy Mainzer at UCLA, and she'll be talking about planetary protection and the NEO mission to survey near-Earth objects and perhaps give us early warning of an asteroid coming our way that maybe we want to divert, as you've seen in many movies, which are totally unrealistic, but nonetheless. We did have a talk, incidentally, on an impact on an asteroid system that showed that we can perturb the motion of an object by impacting it with a man-made object. So I want to go back and find that one. It's very interesting. One really interesting thing about it is the system that they chose, in which it's easy to measure the effect of this, because not a lot of mass that you're shooting at this other thing that has a lot of mass. And then finally we have Harris Lewin talking on the Earth Biogenome Project. His aim is to sequence a large percentage of all the organisms of a certain complexity that exist on the Earth. So with that, I think we want to thank the people on the microphones and on the cameras, and especially our video director, corresponding secretary, and executive director in the back of the room. Let's have a special thank you to Robin. Please return your name badges to the box in the back. And with that, I will now accept a motion to adjourn the 2528th meeting to the social hour. Second? All in favor? All opposed? Meeting is adjourned. AC. Your crew has left. Every one of your guests left.
People still here. Yeah, there's people here, people here. Yeah, some people are here. Probably at least half.
A lot of them left.
Well, I only
I
had
should never use hyperbole. I should,
Yeah, you shouldn't.
I should never use all.
Yeah, don't be